Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scott McKay.
Greetings, gentlemen. Welcome once again to yet another episode of the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. My name is Scott McKay, at Scott McKay on both Twitter and Clubhouse. Hope you'll join us Monday nights on Clubhouse, by the way. Real Scott McKay on Instagram, Scott McKay on YouTube. The website is mountaintoppodcast.com, and the Facebook group for like-minded men of character who want to be better, do better, get better women in their lives is, as always, the Mountaintop Summit. With me today is a returning guest. He's a great guy. He is from the great state of North Carolina. He is the author of lots of great books for both fathers and sons and daughters on how to be better men, how to raise your children to be men and women. And he's a true man of character. One of his most famous books is Manual to Manhood. He's got a couple of them that are newly released, relatively speaking, called Guiding the Next Generation for Parents and Becoming the Next Generation for Younger Folks. So on that note, I welcome back to the show none other than Jonathan Catherman. Jonathan, welcome back, man.
Scott, it's good to be here.
Yeah, I've been wanting to do a show on this particular topic literally for months now. Really, it all started back when COVID panic ensued after the CDC started saying, hey, you know what, maybe you guys better start locking down, putting masks on sometime around late March of last year being 2020 as we record this. And people just started flipping out. Oh my God, the world's going to end. We need to start storing up toilet paper. Man, you remember the scene. And then once again, that kind of panic feeling was revisited here in Texas in particular when we had what we're now referring to as SNOVID, where the temperatures got really low and we were snowed in for a week, just freakishly here in Texas. And people started thinking to themselves, you know what? All these people who are these disaster preppers, maybe they're not so fringy and maybe they're not such wild-haired conspiracy theorists as we thought, because, man, I really wish I had some extra water. I really wish I had some firewood about now. And, you're sitting in North Carolina, and quite literally, as we record this, you guys don't have any gas at the gas stations. And there's video coming out of people storing gasoline in plastic bags and all manner of crazy stuff going on. So it seems like, especially in recent months and years, Jonathan, this has become part of our collective zeitgeist here in the United States and North America in particular to say, hey, you know what, maybe I should be a little bit more prepared when some sort of disaster hits, because all of a sudden we've seen a couple of these disasters. It's starting to make sense, right?
Right. I mean, what's that old saying? It's better to have and not want than to want and not have.
Yeah, how true is that, right?
Little preparedness never hurts. Yeah,
and I think a lot of guys see this as sort of a manly duty, especially the guys who have been on this train for some time now. Hey, I have to have some extra of this. I have to be ready for when this happens. And yet a lot of other people scratch their head and look at those people kind of like they're a little wacky. So in line with what we're going to talk about today, where do you think the balance is, Jonathan, between being prepared for a potential disaster and going overboard with it? I mean, where do you draw the line personally?
Well, I mean, we're so used to being able to get what we need within about 10 miles of our house and about 10 minutes away, right? So if you need something from the hardware store, you need something from the grocery store, you need fuel, you know where you're going, right? It's easy to get. And yet when something happens that sets that supply chain out of sync, or we have a rush on a demand that maybe isn't a demand until we rush it, and all of a sudden you have your access to the resources you need are limited. Yeah, we feel kind of weird. And it's an uneasy feeling, so where's the tipping point between, I have the resources I need and then going all out and having far more than is required because we don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know the answer to where's the tipping point, where's the balance, other than I think that if you are willing and able to handle demands that come upon you, then you have a whole different experience going through the demand than if you're any combination of unwilling and unable, and then you feel like this is, the whole world's coming to an end. So I think maybe the balance isn't necessarily on how much I have stockpiled as much as it is on my mindset, skill set, and tool set, hence my willingness and ability to handle situations. And if I'm willing and able, then I'm pre-prepared. I don't have to be over-prepared.
I think that's an interesting way to look at it. As you talk, one of the things that comes to mind is it seems like maybe the first step should be what kind of potential disasters should we even think about being prepared for? Because let's face it, Jonathan, I'm not sure any of us saw a pandemic coming. I mean, the last one was in 1918. It's like, this is the year 2020. Really? We're not prepared for this thing and it can really go worldwide? And the answer was, of course, yes, it can. Here in Texas, no one had ever really seen snow stick on the ground here in San Antonio longer than about an hour or two. And we were snowed in for a week. We broke record temperatures by 10 or 12 degrees night after night. And it's easy to point a finger at the politicians and say, see, you should have winterized the windmills out in the desert or whatever. But man, that would have been a boondoggle of a tax expenditure had they done it back in the day. And it just wasn't something anybody ever thought about preparing for. So maybe that's the first step.
Yeah, and I think that it's real easy to have this conversation when we're looking at a large event that we can point a finger at and say, they should have, you should have, I should have, right? It's like that. But what about, say, so we're thinking about major disasters. What about the little disasters of life? And let's start with stewardship, right? This is, if you can handle little things, then you can learn to handle big things. So we can get to the topic of like the big national disasters. How about the little stuff? Like you mentioned, how much do we need to prepare? You asked. And I'd encourage your listeners to start with this kind of baseline consideration. How many flat tires do most people have in a lifetime in their car? And the answer is about 5, right? So I travel with a spare tire in my car. I don't travel with 5 spare tires in my car. If I have a flat tire, I know how to change my tire. I get the spare out, I take care of business, and then I go, get the tire fixed and make sure the spare is good to go if it were to happen again. And statistically speaking, it's going to happen again. So now you can do the same concept about weather. Do we have bad weather? Yes. How many bad weather events are we going to have? Well, I don't know, but probably more than one. So am I prepared? Am I home for a bad weather event? I can point to the windmills out in somewhere else, but how about right back in my own house? What do I need to do to prepare for a bad weather event? Or we could talk about the pandemic, that took over the whole world, and how unprepared were we? You know what we weren't prepared for recently in my house? Band-Aids. I joke you not. We had a cut finger, and now we're looking for Band-Aids. Like, my goodness, how do we not have Band-Aids? This is the most ridiculous thing ever. Well, he ended up in a camp out pack and didn't get unpacked and brought back in the house. But I mean, all right, so if we can handle the little aspects of stewardship in our life for the little demands that happen, then we have a better mindset of how I personally can handle and interact with the large demands that I didn't even see coming, like a pandemic or like snowpocalypse.
Yeah, I think that's a good word. And in the mix of everything you just talked about, Jonathan, is this idea of, I don't know, man, you kind of have to forgive yourself a little bit if there's something that comes up that you aren't prepared for. I mean, it's great to try to check all the boxes and make sure you have the stockpile of everything you could ever possibly think you need. But man, because life is the way it is, something's going to happen and you're just not prepared for it. And you kind of have to go, all right, now what? What's the next step? How do I take it from here?
Exactly. And then that's where problem solving skills come in. And that's where, connections to people we know become more valuable than they already are.
Right. Exactly. Like you said, that's where your skill set and your mental preparedness and your mindset even will really honestly become more important than whatever stockpile you have.
Yeah. Okay. So here's something fun for your listeners. There's something called BPS model, which is a way that we assess threats.
And what does BPS stand for?
Oh, too many words. It's basically how your body responds to a threat or a challenge. And let's make it a simpler concept here. Let's just call it a readiness assessment. Okay. So think of a demand, any demand. It can be small, like we just said about a flat tire. It could be large. It could be the pandemic, right? What demands are on our radar? And are you aware of? Because every one of your listeners has different demands that they're thinking about. Some are thinking small, some are thinking large, and some are thinking somewhere in the middle. Let's clarify. Demand it's an urgent request. It's something that it necessitates a specific response. That's a demand. So when a demand presents itself before us, we then run this subconscious and conscious readiness assessment. And the way it works is it basically says, the model works like this. Am I willing and able to take on this demand? So willingness is your mindset. Ability is your skill set and tool set. So if I am willing and able, then my assessment is, yes, I'm ready. If I'm not willing or able, then my assessment is I'm not ready. Now, two different things happen between ready and not ready. If you're ready to take on a demand, then you see it as a challenge, and our brains and bodies love challenges. We literally respond positively to challenges because our performance levels go up when we feel challenged. And I don't mean challenged like if someone's challenging you to a fight, because that's not the same context. In fact, if we hit the fight or flight mechanism, that's the threat side. So if you're not ready, your body responds to the same exact demand as a threat, and our performance usually goes down when we feel threatened. And so the difference is, if you are facing a demand and you're ready, you feel challenged, your performance goes up, you thrive in these situations. Same demand, not ready, you feel threatened, your performance decreases, and you survive those situations. So I'm hoping that your listeners are saying, okay, if I'm preparing for the unknown, I need to say, what's my mindset, skill set, and tool set? And if I have an ample quantity of those resources, then I can take on about anything. And I'm ready for that. And I welcome that challenge. We will thrive. Versus, yeah, I don't know, and I'm worried, and it's a big question mark, and the demands feel threatening, and we try to survive. It is better to be in a thrive mindset than in a survive mindset.
So, Jonathan, as you're talking, I'm reminded of a simple fact that how mentally tough we are is really going to flat out dictate how well we respond to something that happens that is something we should have been prepared for mentally, physically, materially. And, really it's, have we panic-proofed ourselves or have we not?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that right?
Think about your mindset. It's the easiest thing to change, yet the hardest that we deal with on a regular basis. If you have skills and tools, but you don't want to do something, that project's not getting done, right? But if you've got the skills and tools and you change your mind and now you want to do it, you're all over it. It's harder to go acquire tools and harder to go acquire skills than it is to change your mind. So having a mindset that is focused on what matters most before what matters most happens is a good place to be. We call it resolve. You've already decided now what you will do later. It's really hard in the moment to make solid, good decisions unless you've already resolved in practice what it is how you're going to perform. So mindset's critical.
So, what we're talking about here, at least at the macro level, is ye old 2020 foresight.
Yeah.
Anticipate a problem before it comes. And while you're level-headed and not in deep with the emotions of the moment, decide what you're going to do so you can be true to yourself when that actually happens. And we can start with very small situations that are likely to come up, right?
Exactly. Right. So here we're having a gas crisis on the East Coast, right? And as soon as the news comes out that the hackers had taken control of the pipeline, and people rush out and buy gas. Well, in my garage, I've got gas. And it's, sometimes I use it for the lawnmower, and sometimes I'm using it if, we need to fuel the generator. It's there. I don't let those cans get to empty before I go fill them back up. It's the same thing in my car. We live next to a very large nuclear power plant. And if the sirens blare, everybody's supposed to get out of town. Well, if my light on the gas tank's on E half the time, I'm not going very far. So my mindset is I'm just going to be prepared for just the necessities. I take care of the business we got to take care of, even though there's nothing going on. There's no problem yet. So before there's a problem, we're prepared.
And that's even, relatively speaking, a somewhat major problem.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, those are, big things. So what about the little things? So in our mindset, I frame it up like this. So As a social scientist and I'm studying groups of people, I'm looking for the areas of their interest and the things they have influence over versus the things that they're just concerned about. What do they have some type of control versus what's out of their control? So when I'm studying groups of people, and then I apply this to myself, of course, is what is inside my circle of influence versus what's outside my circle of influence. And I can be complaining all day long and worried all day long about the things I have no influence over, and it does me no good. Whereas if I neglect the things I do have influence over, again, when there's a demand I can't meet, I'm the only one who's undercut myself. So put my energy into things I have influence over and allow that circle to get larger and larger and larger, so that when demand presses in, I'm already in the mindset and the skill set and tool set needed to perform.
You know, it's really interesting to think about, Jonathan. Some guys are more mentally prepared for something that comes and kind of knocks them off their stride than other guys are. I mean, some guys, it seems to me, they can be riding along with their family, and one of the kids says, I got to go to the bathroom, and they're 10, 15 miles away from a gas station, and that freaks them out and they panic. Meanwhile, some other guys, you know, it seems like the sky could literally be falling and they have the Australian no worries, mate, attitude towards it. I mean, so can you go overboard and feel like maybe you got this, you know, a little too confidently when really you should perk up and say, oh, wait a minute, you know, this has my attention. I need to take a deep breath and let the adrenaline flow a little bit and make sure something happens. And, you know, I guess I'm still being a little bit esoteric. I'm also imagining, for example, a guy who went and got a concealed carry license and he knows everything about guns and he's a firearm guy. And then suddenly he's faced with a real life situation where he's got to draw his weapon and theoretically defend somebody's life. Is he going to perform as he was trained, or is he going to wilt under pressure? How's a guy even supposed to know that?
I think you just said a really key word, though, is you said trained. And, you know, training is critical. We talk about practice all the time. And in fact, think about how many times we've heard coaches say something like practice makes, and we fill in the blank, you know, perfect, right? It doesn't make perfect. Practice makes better. We're so far from perfect, it's ridiculous. And if it was perfect, then any record that was ever set because someone practiced a lot would never be broken, because what they just did couldn't get any better. But because we aren't perfect, and rarely do we perform at a level that would be anything close to qualifying as perfect, practice makes better. So how do we train? And whether it's in situations that could be dire, or it's, as you said, you know, my kid's got to go to the bathroom, or 10 miles from the closest rest stop or gas station or something like that. How do we get ourselves in a situation where we feel prepared is a matter of training. And I don't think that means you've got to go out to the range every weekend. I do think, though, that training is a series of small incremental steps. They're not one and done events. So how do men know how they're going to respond? I don't know. How much training do they have?
Yeah, I guess that's a good question. I mean, I'm reminded of these guys who are airline pilots, and they retrieve the black box either after something horrific happens, or, you know, or something like the situation with Captain Sully and U.S. Airways happens, where they have to land the plane in the Hudson River and everybody survives and they're a hero. Either way, it's amazing to me how seldom you hear someone freak out. I mean, if they do, they generally don't release the audio, right? But there was a situation where years ago, there was a British Airways 747 that lost all 4 engines and had to glide, and they were trying to start the engines again. And I don't remember the exact words, but when the captain came on the intercom and informed his horrified passengers of what was going on, he was absolutely so calm and almost laughably understated, you know, typical of British culture, right? And people were just amazed by how nonchalant the captain was about reporting this event. And of course, if you know the history of that flight, I mean, I don't expect that people would, but you can go Google it. Certainly, they indeed restarted the engines and landed the plane successfully, but it was very white knuckle there for a second. And indeed, you hear this a lot. You hear this situation a lot where the airline pilots are so well trained that they respond to this emergency just like they were in a simulator, and then they land the plane successfully and they talk to the guys and they're like, well, I was just doing my job. Navy SEALs will report the same thing, you know, special forces guys. even Olympic figure skaters and gymnasts. It's just, I've done this 8 hours a day for 10 years straight. So when it was time to go out and do what I'm supposed to do, I was just in lizard brain mode. And most guys are probably thinking, ain't nobody got time for that. You know what I mean? How could I be reasonably prepared for most anything, even if I don't know what it is that's coming? It just sounds like a circular argument. You know what I mean?
Well, let's go back to, and I mentioned it earlier, the context of stewardship. And I think that we can be well prepared when we are good stewards of what is in our circle of influence. And by stewardship, I mean the responsible management, supervision, and protection of what's been entrusted to your care. So again, that's your circle of influence. So yeah, how could I be ready? Well, stop focusing on the things that are outside of your circle of influence. Put your energy into the areas that you do have influence. Steward it well. Practice as you can. Lots of little bricks build big walls or build big structures. So build one brick at a time. That's how we can practice to become better. That's when you have a readiness assessment because the demand is forced upon you. You say, I'm willing and able. I can take on this challenge. I perform well. I thrive. I grow. I prosper. I succeed. Whereas if you're on the other side of that spectrum and you're not ready because you're either unwilling and able, or you're willing but unable, or you're unwilling and unable, think of there's multiple variations of not being ready. So when the demand presents itself and you feel threatened and your performance goes down, you hit survival mode, you're trying to endure, remain, and exist. Nobody in that position is going back and saying, oh, well, I think I probably practiced too much. The only time you get to the I'm so glad I practiced is because you're thriving in the situation. So we sometimes think the areas of which we need to be prepared for, and we think way bigger than what we actually have in hand to steward. Take care of what you've got. Build it up from there.
What you're talking about is actually a tenet of military training. And indeed, I've heard a lot of those guys, like, for example, Jocko Willink in particular, talk about this circle of influence and being prepared and having the discipline, which Jocko is big on, of course, to do that which you have to do, whether you want to do it or not. But really, if it's something you can't control, then you ask yourself, what can I control in response to that? Not gripping and wringing my hands about all the stuff I can't control. A great example is that very same hacked pipeline in North Carolina that you guys are experiencing the fallout from right now. Hey, you know what? Not any one of us, realistically speaking, could have stopped the hacking from happening. But we can control what we do about when it does get hacked, specifically when there's no more gas and I've got to do something about it. That right. I have control over.
Right. And I can also tell my kids, look, guys, no long drives till we get this gas thing figured out. As inconvenient as that may be, just stick close to the house. Or let's if we're all going the same place but we want to be there at different times, let's find a compromise where we can go together and save on that. I mean, you just got to problem solve this stuff. When something out of your influence, out of your control presses on you and it's a demand, let's get creative in how we handle it. Often I meet guys that put a ton of energy into preparing for something that will most likely never happen, but go for it. But they are also letting go of the things that will happen. So as they're preparing for something that no one could foresee and may or may not come to fruition, the things that need to be managed on a daily basis are slipping aside.
Right. In other words, they're so busy preparing for a zombie apocalypse that they forgot to,
check their kids' homework.
Check their kids' homework or fix this leak in the sink or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
I would rather be in right relationship with my wife because I'm taking care of our relationship than be really concerned about someone who has a different political or different faith or different life belief than me and be all wound up in that conflict that doesn't actually exist in my own experience when my wife is right here and she does.
Well, there are two factors at play there that I think are very important to discuss here. One is getting distracted from what's important, and the second is preventative medicine, as it were. at the generalist level. I mean, you don't wait until you're in a crisis management situation with your wife to figure out how to get along with her and how to run a marriage.
Right. And the same thing goes with my teenagers.
Right. You do a little bit here and there to prevent the catastrophe from happening. And I think that has a lot to do with preparedness, is instead of thinking, 2020 hindsight, we should have weatherized the windmills, or we should have had a disaster planning place in case there was a novel coronavirus that ravaged the world. It's like, okay, here are some things that are likely to happen. What can I do right now to soften the blow if some of those likely things actually do happen?
Right.
And then, like I said, also being distracted by things that don't matter. I mean, the amount of time we put into things that really, first of all, are beyond our control. And second, and perhaps even more importantly, don't even really matter. How much time do we burn on political Twitter or checking in with people's cat videos on Facebook, thinking this is a good use of my time? And of course, all of us do need some downtime, Jonathan. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and get all wonkish on how we should be so focused all the time and only do something that matters. But again, it comes back down to what is in the circle of my influence? What can I control? And how is it going to prepare me to make life better for me and for those I love and who are depending on me to provide, protect, and preside when the need comes? And I think, again, it's all about balance, but I think it's a very fair question. And I think guys should at least give some thought to it, because I think that's probably the first step in making sure we are prepared for those things. That and getting a little mental toughness, which of course comes from, wisdom and maturity.
Grit is incredible. You need to have that grit and that resilience and that resolve. That's part of what allows us to be prepared mentally. And it's, I mentioned, and I love mentioning, I'm going to mention it again. Guys, if you want to be prepared for the big things, be good stewards of the little things. There's no way we can expect to take care of the big things in life if we can't handle the little things in life.
And I think people are so offended nowadays that we're training our kids to not be ready for anything. We're softening them up.
We've not done a good job of giving them the many small skill sets and tool sets they need to succeed. And I don't mean give them like entitlement. What I mean by giving them is the time to practice, an opportunity to try, the return to something again and again. It's just something that we need to provide for young people if they're going to grow up to be independent rather than dependent. And I think that that's maybe one of the fears that we have when we talk about, survival and preparedness, is we don't want to be dependent on others. Well, that's a reactive response in the big term. We can prepare for that by practicing small acts of independence in between the big demands, right? And what that does is that builds up that grit, that resolve, that resiliency. Like putting calluses on your hands. You don't do that in a single work event. You do that over a long period of time working with your hands, right? We've all seen the guy that picked up a shovel as a weekend warrior and comes out with blisters by Monday and can barely open and close his palms, versus the guy who works real hard and uses the tools that he's been given in the way of his hands. And they're strong and they're calloused and he knows how to function and take care of business because it's something that has been built in his life over many, many experiences and many years. So go back to be a good steward of the little things. Take care of your business as you go. When the big thing shows up, you'll be far more prepared.
The safety of the suburban lifestyle, the suburban sleepwalk, as I call it.
Right.
We're also safe in our little cocoon around here until we're not. And then it's like, oh, now what do we do? Right?
It's interesting because I agree with you, but isn't that been kind of our whole idea of what we thought the good life would be? I mean,
Yes,
as a parent,
exactly.
I want my kids to have a better life than mine. That is one of my goals as a parent. But that doesn't mean that you lull to sleep to have that better life, right? No, it shouldn't be. And I don't mind living in suburbia. I live in suburbia, right? But I can still take care of my house. I can still take care of my yard. I can still take care of the things that are in my life that I own and possess. But more importantly, I take care of the people. And people come before things. So be prepared relationally as much as you are, physically and tangibly.
Yeah. I'm still reminded of the simple reality of a lot of the cultures, a lot of the lifestyles that we here in suburban America think of as either primitive or undeveloped. I mean, you have developing countries, right, where these folks live. If they don't have a gas station with gas, or they don't have a supermarket with toilet paper, that's not going to matter to them.
You still figure it out.
Right. They're going to figure it out automatically because that's just what they've been doing for hundreds of years. Meanwhile, if our supply chain gets interrupted here in our allegedly evolved state of American suburbia, we're ruined. You know?
Well, yeah, we rush Costco.
Right. But that doesn't change the fact that it's nice to have this safety and security. I mean, that's way down Maslow's pyramid of needs, you know.
Right.
But, you know, it's good to get out and have a little adventure and raise your kids up to get outside that cocoon sometimes and figure things out. And this all comes back full circle to what I was mentioning briefly before, and I'd love to get your opinion on a practical level, which is this idea of either feeling like you're overreacting or underreacting to something that comes up and demands your attention because you should have been prepared for it, or it's some kind of disaster or at least minor crisis that's got to go on. During SNOVID, my wife came to me about Tuesday of this week-long event and said, we need to fill the bathtubs up with water because we're not going to have tap water. And my first response, and I'm being a little vulnerable here, was, oh, come on, right? Because that just was unthinkable to me. I mean, we're not going to have fresh water. I mean, what is this? You know, a Mad Max Thunderdome movie? And sure enough, by Wednesday afternoon, they turned off the water. And I felt like I had failed as a protector and a provider. Now, I'm going to issue the caveat that the bathtubs were indeed full of water, and I rolled my eyes the whole time we were doing it. But I had to humbly admit, with my tail between my legs, proverbially, that I was wrong. You know, what difference did it make? What skin was it off my nose to fill the bathtubs up with water? But I'll tell you what, there wouldn't have been a whole lot of toilet flushing there for 2.5 days had we not done that. You know, we may have theoretically gone longer without water had we not done that. And that would have been disastrous. So, I mean, I was a bit too cavalier about that. Meanwhile, when COVID first hit, I distinctly remember waiting in line to go to the grocery store, and the shelves were still pretty much fully stocked. You know, I saw a guy who appeared to be retirement age with a full cart of basic staples. I mean, the kind that the UN would airlift to Somalia and drop with a parachute from an airplane, you know, like bags of white rice, white flour. You know, I'm thinking to myself, hey, you know, there's a box of Uncle Ben's there with seasoning in it. You can get the curly pastas and all kinds of things that have a similar shelf life to a bag of white rice with a generic label on it. But it seems like because people feel like they're preparing for a disaster, that it has to feel disastrous. And I had to chuckle to myself a little bit about that. So, I mean, yeah, there's this overreaction and then there's this underreaction. How do we head check ourselves, Jonathan, to make sure we're in the right frame there?
I don't know.
That's a damn good question.
Well, because, I mean, think about it. So the dude rolls out of the grocery store with a shopping cart full of white rice and flour.
Right, exactly.
Maybe that's what he needed to feel secure. And it didn't do him or anybody else any harm to have that. It's not like he stole it from someone. Right. He didn't fight anybody for it. And filling up your bathtub with water so you could, scoop it in the toilet to flush. You know, if the pipes had not been shut off, you just would have pulled the plug on the drain and it'd been fine. But your mental, your wife's mental, you guys were like feeling, okay, at least we don't have to concern ourselves with that. What do we actually have to concern ourselves with? So what's overreacting, what's underreacting? We can watch TV shows of people who are prepped and ready for, 2 years in underground survival mode, and I, you know what, if it came to that, they would be the ones going, see, we told you so. And meanwhile, I don't have that. So does that mean at a point in time, I'm done? I'd like to believe that we're prepared enough that we could problem solve as well. And apocalyptic survival is much different than daily survival. And So I don't want to underreact to daily, and I don't want to overreact to the unknown. I think that, again, it comes back down to be a good steward of what's been trusted to your care. And right now, today, this is what I can see, and so I will care for it. And what I can't see, but I got a glimpse of perhaps, or an inkling of, I will move and care for it in that direction also. But I'm not going to just go all into what I have no idea about and neglect what I do.
I would tend to believe, and this goes back to mindset, that if you're feeding the panic, it's probably an overreaction. If you're genuinely contributing to a feeling of safety and well-being, not only in your own mind and spirit and heart, but in that of those around you, I think you're probably doing the right thing. I should have just agreed immediately that it was the right thing to fill up the tubs full of water because it wasn't a big deal and it made everybody around me feel safer. Yeah. Meanwhile, if I'm going to the grocery store and spending too much money on white rice and flour, I may need to check myself and go, why am I doing this? Is it because I feel like I have to, or because I want to, or have I even put much thought into it? Because, you and I can agree to disagree on this. I'm not sure we're even disagreeing. It was simply a matter of, hey, if this makes this old guy feel good, he's not hurting anybody. But I'm thinking to myself, if I'm in that position, I'd like to take the $200 he spent and actually buy some food that's going to make my family like their dinner a little bit better, that's going to have the same shelf life, or maybe question, do I need 10-week supply of toilet paper today just because everybody else seems to be buying toilet paper? That to me seems to be feeding the panic.
Right. And again, we can get down in the weeds of, do we need toilet paper or rice? I think the real question is, how resourceful are you? If I don't have toilet paper, there's other resources. But when people get in their minds that there's only one way to do something, that I think is where you cross the line.
Yeah, agreed.
Right.
Totally agree. Well, I think that's actually a good place to end this show. We've talked about a lot of very interesting areas, and I dare to say this is a show that went in a different direction than most guys expected it to. And what I would like to do now is point guys to your new book, or perhaps I should be guiding them there, right? Which is called Guiding the Next Great Generation. There's also a companion book called Becoming the Next Great Generation. I will put both of those books at the top of my Amazon influencer page queue, which you can get to by going to mountaintoppodcast.com/Amazon. There are also other books by Jonathan Catherman up there, including his very popular book, Manual to Manhood, which we talked about last time, which I will also put near the top of the queue for you as well. When you go to mountaintoppodcast.com/Catherman, what I'm going to do this time is just point you to his main website where you can read more about what Jonathan Catherman has going on and get any or all of his books from that website. And you can get there by going to mountaintoppodcast.com/Catherman, Catherman. It's spelled exactly the way it sounds. Jonathan Catherman, what a great opportunity for us to talk about something so important to guys. It's been a pleasure to have you back on the show, and I hope you'll come back again soon.
Look forward to it, Scott. Thanks for having me, man. I always enjoy talking with you.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Not only is this a great, important topic, but I think we talked about it in a way that guys may have never heard it discussed in before. So that was very, very cool. Guys, if you haven't been to mountaintoppodcast.com just yet, please visit there, get all the free downloads, including my book, Sticking Points Solved. Guess what, guys? If you have ever had any issue with a woman ever, and who hasn't, right? What you do is you get your hands on that book for free, and chances are it's talked about. Quick, easy steps in that book, which is absolutely yours for free when you get in on my daily newsletter, which is fluff free. I send you something actionable that you can use every day. You can sign up for that and get your hands on the free book, Sticking Points Solved, when you go to www.mountaintoppodcast.com. While you're there, please sign up to talk to me for 25 minutes. It's free. We can talk about where you are right now, where you want to be in your life with women, and help you get on the track to success with women that you've always wanted. Origin in Maine has the best boots you will ever wear. You want to be prepared, get yourself some of those boots. You'll be prepared for almost anything. Plus, you'll look good doing it. Use the coupon code MOUNTAIN10 and you will get 10% off your order. And you can visit Origin in Maine, Jocko Willing's company, of course, by using the link on the site at mountaintoppodcast.com. I also invite you to go visit the fine folks at herosoap.com. Get you a few bars of that incredible soap. It is made of all natural ingredients. It won't feminize you, decrease your testosterone levels like a lot of the commercial fake products out there, shampoos and soaps will. And each bar of soap lasts you at least 3 weeks, more like a month, and they smell great. You'll smell great, and the women will notice. So definitely use the code Mountain10 with the Hero Soap guys also, and you can access herosoap.com from a link on the website at mountaintoppodcast.com as well. And until I talk to you again on the next episode, this is Scott McKay from X&Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X&Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X&Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.